Hi history lovers, and welcome back to the channel where I bring you new videos every Friday looking at the events of the past. Today on History Calling we're asking the question, did Anne Boleyn have a pseudo-pregnancy known as pseudocyesis in 1534? There is considerable evidence that Henry VIII's second wife was pregnant again within months of the birth of her daughter Elizabeth in September 1533, but no second baby appeared in the summer of 1534 as would have been expected. Then, in September, the Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuys made a comment in a letter to Charles V of Spain, which for some historians has thrown the whole issue of whether Anne was truly pregnant or not into confusion. Stay tuned to hear the evidence and decide for yourself. For other videos on the Tudors and much more, please also remember to subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on and follow me on Instagram, where my username is History Calling. I'll leave a link for that in the description box. Rumours of Anne's second pregnancy date from late January 1534. Her biographer Eric Ives writes that the imperial court had been informed of it by the 23rd of that month, saying they had gained this information, quote, allegedly by a letter from the newly arrived English ambassador in France. If this was Lord William Howard, the date of arrival must have been the beginning of December, suggesting that Anne became pregnant in November 1533. Eustace Chapuys wrote on the 28th of January that Anne de Boleyn is now in the family way again. This date would mean that she was at least a month pregnant, perhaps even more, again giving her a likely conception date of November or December 1533. Given that she would have been in confinement at Greenwich Palace for a month after the birth of Elizabeth and not able to resume sleeping with Henry until at least the second week of October, this timeline makes sense. She had quickly fallen pregnant with Elizabeth at the end of 1532, shortly after she began sleeping with Henry, so a fast conception mirrored her previous experience. Additional evidence survives dating from the following months, which further supports the conclusion that she was pregnant again. On the 26th of February, Chapuys wrote to Charles V that Henry had said that, quote, according to the laws of the kingdom, the princess, meaning Mary in this case, was unable to succeed, and there was no other princess except his daughter Elizabeth, until he had a son, which he thought would happen soon. 2 months later, on the 27th of April, Anne's Receiver-General, George Taylor, wrote a letter from Greenwich to Lady Lisle, whose husband Arthur was a son of Edward IV and therefore Henry's illegitimate half-uncle. In this letter, Taylor remarked that, the Queen hath a goodly belly, praying our Lord to send us a prince. If Anne was showing at this stage, then that would suggest that she was at least 4 months or 16 weeks pregnant, again chiming nicely with a conception in November or December. There is also evidence that in April 1534 or later, Henry VIII ordered a royal cradle to be created for the expected infant. This evidence is an undated receipt from the royal goldsmith Cornelius Hayes, addressed to Mr. Secretary, meaning Thomas Cromwell, for, quote, a silver cradle, price £16, for making a silver plate, altering the images, making the roses underneath the cradle, the roses about the pillars, and new burnishing, 13 shillings 4d. For the stones that were set in gold in the cradle, 15 shillings. For fringes, the gold about the cushions, tassels, white satin, cloth of gold, lining, cypers, and swaddle bands, 13 shillings 6d. Total, £18, 1 shilling 10d. The silver that went to the dressing of the Adam and Eve, the making of all the apples, the gilding of the foot and setting of the curl, 33 shillings 4d. The evidence is open to interpretation, however, as it's possible it refers to Anne's final pregnancy, which she lost at the end of January 1536. She was just 3.5 months gone in that case, however, and the idea that Henry had already ordered a cradle by that point, especially if she had previously lost a baby or had had a pseudo-pregnancy, seems very optimistic. I believe the king would have been more likely to wait until after his wife's quickening, meaning whenever she felt the baby start to kick, to order such an item. As Eric Ives has noted, 1534 is also too late to be ordering up a crib for Elizabeth, and the receipt cannot date to before that April, as Cromwell wouldn't yet have been Henry's principal secretary. It also cannot refer to the birth of the future Edward VI in 1537 either, as by then Cromwell would have been referred to as the Lord Privy Seal. Incidentally, if you'd like to read Ives' excellent book on Anne's life, I'll leave it linked in the description box, along with some other books, films, TV shows and documentaries about her life. We also have a single portrait medal of Anne which is dated 1534 and which now resides in the British Museum. This is the only contemporary likeness of the Queen to survive, and is generally thought to have been struck to celebrate the expected birth of a son, as nothing else of great enough importance to warrant such a medal happened that year. The reason only one copy survives, so the theory goes, is that Anne lost the baby, and so it was pointless to create any more of the medals. Next, we have a set of instructions given to Anne's brother George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford, on the 7th of July 1534. In these instructions, Rochford, who was being sent on an ambassadorial mission to France, was told to request that a meeting between Henry and the French King Francis I, which was scheduled for August, be delayed until April 1535. The reason being that his sister was so far gone with child she could not cross the sea with the king to attend the meeting as well, nor did she want to be without Henry at such a crucial time. Another letter from the 27th of July, this time written by Chapuys, also references Rochford's mission and Anne's continuing pregnancy. In this instance, Chapuys writes that among the news Rochford had sent from France was the postponement of the interview till the month of April, owing, as people here say, to the wish expressed by Madame de Boleyn of being present at the conferences, which is quite impossible by reason of her pregnancy. I'm also going to mention a letter which is sometimes attributed to the 24th of June 1535. It's from William Kingston, Constable of the Tower of London, to Lord Lisle, and includes the line, "Her Grace has as fair a belly as I have ever seen." This is understandably taken as evidence of another pregnancy in mid-1535, however there is no other source that says that Anne was pregnant again until the end of that year, and it has been postulated by the editor of the Lisle letters that this document actually dates to either June 1533, when she was expecting Elizabeth, or June 1534 during her second supposed pregnancy. This dating is supported by the fact that the letter makes reference to a man named Sir Christopher Garnies, who died in October 1534. It may therefore be additional evidence for the 1534 pregnancy. Whether it is or not, however, I think we've established that Anne and those around her certainly believed she was pregnant that year. But what's the evidence that they were wrong, and that this was a phantom pregnancy? First and foremost, there's the fact that no baby appeared and we have no record of a miscarriage or stillbirth. However, far more important is another letter written by Chapuys, this time dated the 24th of September. This is the first we've heard of the pregnancy from any source in nearly 2 months, and the ambassador tells his master that, quote, "Ever since the king began to entertain doubts as to his mistress's reported pregnancy, he has renewed and increased the love which he formerly bore to another very handsome young lady of this court." On the surface, this seems damning, for it appears that Henry doubted Anne was ever pregnant at all. There are 2 other ways of looking at this, however. First, Chapuys may simply have been throwing shade at a woman he hated by insinuating that she couldn't produce a boy or even another child. This could even be an oblique reference to something that had happened to Catherine of Aragon back in 1510, when she miscarried but was persuaded by her doctors that she was still pregnant with the second of a set of twins. Second, Chapuys may not mean that Henry doubted the pregnancy was real, but rather that he doubted its success. Perhaps the baby had stopped kicking, and it was increasingly evident that Anne had miscarried but not yet delivered. I also have a video on the childbearing experiences of another Queen Anne, in this case Anne Stuart, and in the course of researching that I read of numerous instances during her 17 pregnancies where she delivered a stillborn baby that her doctors thought had been dead inside her for days or even weeks. I'll leave that video linked on screen and in the description box. It's certainly hard to believe that if there had been rumours or evidence that Anne Boleyn had never been pregnant in the first place in 1534, that Chapuys wouldn't have heard them at this point or later, or that he wouldn't have reported them. Of the many slanderous things said about Anne during her life and in the decades after her death, the accusation that she had had a pseudo-pregnancy was never levelled at her. Yet at the same time, it's strange that Chapuys is only reporting doubts about the pregnancy in late September. Even if we assume Anne fell pregnant at the end of December 1533, she should have taken to her chamber to await the expected birth by the beginning of September at the latest. Here, however, Eric Ives also offers an explanation, writing of Chapuys that, "We have to remember that the ambassador had been out of touch with the court while it was on summer progress. Away from the public eye, with a smaller number of attendants than at other times, total discretion was achieved. Meaning Anne lost the baby at an earlier date in the summer, but it was kept quiet and Chapuys' information was out of date." This is certainly possible. When Catherine of Aragon lost her baby girl in 1510, it was initially well hushed up according to her confessor, who wrote that only he, the king, Catherine's doctor, and 2 of her Spanish women knew what had happened. By contrast, when her daughter Mary suffered a phantom pregnancy, it was the talk of the court as people began to suspect that there was no royal heir on the way. It would have been all the harder for Mary to keep her condition quiet, as she was also so convinced of her pregnancy that she took to her chamber to await the birth. Anne did not, and we can be certain of that, as there would be plenty of evidence in the royal accounts and correspondence coming out of the court if she had, just as there was when she took to her chamber to await Elizabeth's arrival. This suggests that the Queen knew she'd lost a baby and was not deluding herself, as Mary would do, that she was still expecting. We also have to wonder if Anne could have mistakenly believed herself pregnant for such a long time, given how recently she'd actually been pregnant. When Catherine and Mary had their false pregnancies, Catherine had only ever been pregnant once before and had lost the baby before the later stages of that pregnancy, while Mary had never been pregnant at all. Furthermore, Catherine seems to have only believed she was still expecting because her doctors were telling her so. Anne was in a very different situation. She'd been pregnant as recently as September 1533. She knew what it felt like to feel a real baby kick, or to press down on her abdomen and feel that her son or daughter was there. Lastly, while she was certainly under pressure to produce a boy, Ives argues that this stress would not have been enough to produce pseudocyesis, given the recent arrival of a healthy baby. She was also several years younger than Mary was when she had attempted to get pregnant, and observers wrote that she appeared happy and relaxed during 1534. When George Taylor had mentioned her pregnancy, for instance, he also said that the King and Queen are merry and in good health. There is also a theory that Anne lost the baby between the 26th of June and the 2nd of July, as the King and Queen were reportedly merry at Hampton Court Palace on the earlier date, only for Henry to suddenly leave Anne there on the later one and go on progress. It's difficult to reconcile this notion, though, with the fact that George Boleyn's instructions on the 7th of July for his dealings with the French king specifically say that Anne was still pregnant, and Chapuys further mentions the pregnancy at the end of July. The authors of this theory, Sarah Morris and Natalie Gruninger, write in their book on Anne, linked in the description box, that Henry was so disappointed by this that he was, quote, no longer able to face Francis, who was already the father of 3 healthy sons, and therefore a cover story was created to save face and the whole event swept under the carpet. This seems like a stretch to me, given the lack of evidence for a miscarriage during this week or Henry's mindset regarding it. The pregnancy had been widely reported and news of its loss would likely have made its way to Francis anyway. The scheduled meeting was initially supposed to have taken place a good 7 weeks after the supposed miscarriage, and I can't see Henry delaying this monarchical summit and continuing to pretend that Anne was pregnant to his fellow monarch for such a long time. Nevertheless, this hypothesis does still support the idea of a genuine pregnancy. So, it's crunch time. Do I think Anne had a pseudo-pregnancy? No, I don't. I think she truly was pregnant again in 1534 and that she lost the baby. I don't think she was prone to pseudocyesis, which is a very rare disorder, nor do I think that a phantom pregnancy wouldn't be mentioned in any sources, especially Chapuys' letters. It would have been a useful slander to throw against her at the time of her fall in 1536 too, but we hear nothing of it. Nor did Anne take to her chamber as Catherine of Aragon and Mary I both did when they falsely believed themselves to be expecting, suggesting a known miscarriage. Furthermore, if she was susceptible to this psychosomatic illness, it's interesting that she didn't have another phantom pregnancy. If we omit the probably false idea that she was expecting in mid-1535, it was October of that year before she conceived again. All that being said, there is certainly enough evidence to argue the other side of this debate, and I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section as to whether you think Anne's 1534 pregnancy was genuine or not. While you're down there, please also remember to give this video a like. If you're an Anne fan, I also have videos on her birth, her relationship with Henry, her death, and the exhumation of her bones by the Victorians, which you may wish to watch next. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.